Hello staff, this is Jessica Cotter with the Curriculum Office. I just want to take some time to go over the staff evaluation process for the 17-18 school year. If you are interested, I sent along an attachment that looks like this. It's a Word document. You may want to have that with you to take notes on or to look at. The image is not great in the PowerPoint. But overall, I just want to go through the pieces with you that are a little bit different, and hopefully I can try to get through that without it being too lengthy of a video. Feel free to write down questions you have or any thinking that you'd like to share, and and of course you can always call or email, but I'll be around to buildings just to get feedback. So just a few pieces before I go into the tool too much, especially for those of you new to the tool or new to the district. When I say Marzano evaluation tool, I'm referring to the observation tool that your evaluator uses to observe your instruction or your work. That is in iObservation at effectiveeducators.com, and that is considered this year 75% of your evaluation score. The instructional tool is a specific, that's for people who have students rostered to them, and it's a type of evaluation tool. The non-instructional is the other type, so for people who don't have students that they work with directly, they would use that tool. The professional growth plan refers to, for those of you that are new teachers, a piece of the evaluation process that you will do in the fall with your principal to kind of target certain elements to grow during the year. The student growth data, on the other hand, that is an Excel template, and that was attached with this video, and we'll go through that later, but that's 25%. The student growth data is 25% of an overall evaluation score for your classroom teachers. When I talk about an element, that is a particular, specific, observable strategy, instructional strategy from the evaluation tool. And then the protocols are the rubrics used by your observer or evaluator to determine your score for each of those elements. So just some vocabulary, you'll see them all again as I go through. Reminder this year that for those teachers of record, 75% of your score is that instructional tool, and then 25% is your student growth data. For those of you that are using the non-instructional tool, that's 100% is the non-instructional tool. And that scoring also includes people who do not have students rostered to them, like an academic interventionist. Even if you're using the instructional tool for your observation, it counts for 100% of your score. Student growth is only collected by people who have students rostered to them, a teacher of record. Over the summer, I spent some time reading the 2011 Michigan tenure law as well as the updates from 2015, and there's also documents that show the way the law has been applied in schools and the changes. So a couple pieces I pulled out that I thought would be particularly of interest to staff. I've listed them here. The top one, just to let you know what that means, student growth averages or scores are an average of 3 years. So when you get your student growth score, and I'll go through that tool with you in a little bit, when you get your student growth score in June, you will send that to your principal. Your principal will submit it to the curriculum office, and it gets averaged with last year's score. So it'll only be 2 years worth, because we only have 2 years worth for this year. Next year it'll be 3 years worth, and then it's just the 3 years, the most recent 3 years for every score. Also, teachers should get feedback within 30 days. That could be your post-conference, or that could be the feedback in the actual evaluation tool itself. If there are 3 highly effective ratings in a row, a teacher can be evaluated every other year. We're only in year 2, but we'll revisit that in the future. The advanced professional certificate, I did not know this was a thing, but when you go to renew your certificate, if 3 out of the last 5 years, because it's 5-year cycles, were highly effective, you can apply for the advanced professional certificate as long as you don't have any ineffective ratings. For probationary, or that's like teachers who haven't been tenured yet, for you to become tenured and get that professional certificate, you have to have 3 effective or highly effective ratings in a row. And then finally, the law did stipulate who would complete the professional growth plan, and that's who we are asking to do the professional growth plan this year. And it's teachers who are first year in the district, so not tenured, or teachers who were minimally effective or ineffective. And they would do that growth plan in collaboration with their building principal. Last year, the curriculum office collected feedback from staff several points in the year, and we analyzed that feedback and looked for patterns. And the overall pattern we saw was that it's too cumbersome and it's too confusing. And you can kind of see the different ways that was iterated to us. And it felt like it was difficult for people to really invest in the tool because it was an overwhelming amount of information. The calculations weren't clear. It felt inconsistent. So this year, our attempt at shifting from the Marzano Legacy tool, which is what we used last year, to the Marzano Focus tool, which is what we'll use this year, the goal is to address a lot of those concerns. The first one, the growth plan, being done by not every member of staff, but only those stipulated by the law. Student growth calculations, and I'll go over those in a little while. Also now will be more sensitive to students who came close to the threshold but didn't maybe make it all the way. The scoring is clearer. Now it's an average of highest score for the Marzano tool, and I'll go over that with you on a sheet as well. The PD, instead of it being, very specific Marzano PD, we're trying to embed the idea of looking into instructional strategies into, peer professional learning community inquiry processes. So it doesn't feel like, we're doing this separate Marzano thing. It really should be focused on the teaching strategies that you want to look into. So we've all attended more training. I feel like all your administrators are more comfortable with the online tool itself. We are trying to make it clear who's using the instructional and the non-instructional. And hopefully through this screencast, it becomes clearer kind of what the school year will look like. And for the sake of clarity, this page shows which tool each staff member is connected with, as well as what growth component. So for example, if you're a teacher of record, I'm a classroom teacher, I will be using the focused teacher evaluation model, and I will be keeping track of my student growth data on the district provided template. Now if I work with students like an academic interventionist, but I'm not a teacher of record, I still will use the focused teacher evaluation model, and that will count for 100% of my evaluation because the student growth data is not a part of your evaluation unless you are a teacher of record. And I will still collect data, but I will not fill out the student growth template. I'll attach that data to a narrative document that we will send out towards the end of the year. So hopefully that information is clear. If it isn't, or if you have questions, your building principals are familiar with this, or you can email or call me. Now moving into the specifics of the Marzano Focused tool, so if you know you're not using the focused or the instructional tool, if you know you're non-instructional, feel free to tune me out for a minute here. It went from 60 elements down to 23. The goal for the year, the target is that all elements will be marked. So whereas last year there was some confusion that some people had, X number of elements marked and someone else had fewer or more, this year all elements get marked for every teacher. And you'll notice that it's all one sheet now. There's not separate forms. The standards-based planning, that's kind of like your planning elements from before. The professional responsibilities are similar to your reflection conversation. It also incorporates PD practices. So these two areas, 6 elements, are teacher-driven. They're things that you do, and the outcomes are about your behaviors. Whereas these two, the standards-based instruction and conditions for learning, are about the classroom. So these elements, the desired effects, which we'll look at what that means in a minute, the desired effects are about student behaviors and what students are doing. There's only one pre-conference form that you have to fill out, one post-conference. This tool does require a standards-based instructional process, and we'll go through that more as we go through this process. And like I said earlier, the scoring is an average of the highest score for each element. And then each element within the tool, there's a lot of examples of what that element might look like in action. The other big difference on the tool last year, in order to be innovating, it was 100% of students had to be doing that thing. Whereas with this tool, it's 90%. So recognizing the Marzano Learning Institute, they collected data from a lot of districts and realized this complaint of, 100% of kids doing this thing just seems a bit unreasonable. They recognize that and recognize that being an innovating teacher doesn't mean 100% of the kids 100% of the time. So that threshold of 90% I think allows for a little more flexibility in that innovating category. All right, so one of the attachments I sent you is a PDF of all of the different elements, and this is an example. The element is up here at the top, the identifying critical content from the standards, that's an element. So as you look through that packet, you will see pages that look like this. And I want to kind of go through with you what each of these pieces means, just for clarity's sake. So the focus statement, of course in black, that's the actual strategy or element itself. The focus statement is what the strategy looks like when it's being done. So what is the teacher doing or the student doing? The desired effect is the outcome. So how do you know if the focus statement is actually happening as it should? These example teacher instructional techniques are the most commonly seen examples. It doesn't mean they're all the examples. It just gives everybody an idea of what we're looking for. Down here, the monitoring, this is a piece of the process that we're looking for as you move from a 2, 3, and 4, is that you're basically checking to see, are the students doing what I would like them to be doing, or am I seeing the desired effect? And if not, if I'm not seeing the desired effect, then what adaptations am I making to meet the needs of all the kids to get them to do the thing that I'm trying to get them to do? So the way this flow works from top to bottom will help your evaluator and help you understand the progression from a 2, a 3, to a 4. Because this 4, based on student evidence, implements adaptations to achieve effect in 90% or more students. That's documented here, like, oh, I noticed the students aren't doing the thing, so I'm going to make this change, and that gets more students where I want them to be. So that's kind of the shift from a 2 to a 3 to a 4. The scale, the developing through innovating, is a lot about how many kids are doing the thing and what are you doing to get more students from one to the other. Now scoring. So this seems to be an area that a lot of people want to make sure they're clear on. So I've attached this as a Word document. Some of you have seen it already. These are all 23 of the elements in the instructional tool. And this example would imply that an observer saw this particular teacher 3 times, observation 1, 2, and 3. Each element is scored at least 1 time, but not all of them are scored every time. The green boxes are the score that actually gets calculated. So you'll notice if there are different scores, a 2 and a 4 here, a 1 and a 3 here, a 3 and a 4 here, the highest score is the one that gets scored, and that is because this is a competency-based model. So basically, if you have shown that level with that element, then that has shown us that you understand that element and you can apply that element at that level, so that's the score that gets calculated. Every element is weighted equally, so even though this says that these 3 elements are 13%, that's why there's a 0.13 there, of your overall score, that's because it's 3 out of 23, and that's 13%. So there's no hidden calculations. Every element counts the same. They're all weighted the same. So down here, the scores are averaged for the domain. The tool averages by domain, so you can see, like, if there's a domain you're particularly strong in, you can see that. It doesn't change your overall score. The score is still the same as if each element were weighted the same. A couple points of clarity. In the pre-conference, for aligning resources to standards, as well as planning to close the achievement gap, both of these elements in your pre-conference will be a 2. And that's because the 2 is you're planning on doing this thing. It can't shift to a 3 until the actual observation. So just so you know, when you meet with your observer, with your evaluator, that's a conversation you want to have, that like, okay, it's a 2, that means you're on track to you doing the thing, and then in the actual observation it will shift to a 3 or a 4 depending on if you do the thing you say you're going to do. For the instructional strategies here, Notice this identifying critical content is required evidence in every lesson. This element will get marked every time. This whole piece here hinges on the content you're teaching being linked to a standard and that you are working towards proficiency on that standard. So the expectation for this whole piece is that you know what proficiency looks like and you can adapt and differentiate to get students to that point. These are also organized from top to bottom here as the ones that teachers scaffold the most here, all the way down to the ones where students are working with more autonomy. So basically the more autonomy students have down here, the more rigorous the expectation that they are independently thinking about the content. These conditions for learning, these 7 elements, should be seen pretty much every time as far as they're part of your classroom routine. Now I know if someone just stops in for 10 minutes, you might not see them versus a formal where they are there for longer, but just note that these are considered a part of the routines that you put in place. Alright, so I'd mentioned for this piece that your instruction is rooted in a standard, that you have determined what proficiency looks like for that standard. So a part of this process would be the development of proficiency scales. Basically what that means is you have determined what proficiency looks like for the content you're teaching, and you have connected that with what kids would be doing to show proficiency. So it's similar to just determining where on the taxonomy level the standard falls, and then how will I know if kids can do that level depending on how rigorous it is. Some of you, I think the junior high and the high school, have received this laminated fold-out that goes more in depth on these. It's the same idea that it shows you the taxonomy level and you connect that with your standard, and from there you can kind of start to design what students should be able to do to achieve that level of rigor. Just show you what that might look like. So secondary teachers may have watched a video where I described this to them. If my standard is students can analyze causes of World War I, and then I've also got one that's a literacy standard about events within a text, that would be my 3. That's proficiency. Then I can look at my verbs, can analyze the causes and think about, well, what would they be able to do if they could go above and beyond? And then what do they need to be able to do in order to get there? What's the progression? They have to identify some things and explain some things before they can actually analyze the things. The focused model anticipates that assumes that you will have designed your units around standards. So the elements, you'll see built into that some language around proficiency scales and the standards themselves. So because the tool assumes that, for your formal observation, you'll want to go into the pre-conference knowing, what is the content I'm teaching that day and what would proficiency look like for those students. We will dig much more into that in the future. Alright, the focused tool as far as online, this is the non-instructional tool. The non-instructional tool online, I've got a whole bunch of slides here to look at. The unique thing about this, or the thing that's different from last year, is it does have this piece right here in the middle that says if applicable. So one of the things that was tough for non-instructional staff is sometimes they're maybe in an IEP meeting or doing something with a group of adults, and other times they might be working with a student. So what this tool allows the observer to do is it allows some flexibility regarding, is it with students or is it not. It also is more specific down here for the language. So even though some of the elements say student, it's a generic term to represent who the instructional support member is working with. So I think the tool really works to be more specific here in regards to what the work looks like for non-instructional staff. And again, I'll work with Wayne and the teachers or the staff on this tool to help clarify any questions that they have. iObservation, for those of you that haven't logged in a while, it can be found at effectiveeducators.com. You want to make sure you have your sign-on and password. That's how you will access all of your evaluation data. The online component doesn't look a whole lot different than last year. It has the resource library here where you can look for videos or PDFs or documents regarding pretty much all these pieces I just went through with you. You can find more support here. You also can do peer observations, and I know some buildings are using this peer observation option during their collaborative time on Wednesday mornings to work with each other. There's also, under the Reports tab here, you can look at all of your observation data, including last year's information. On to the growth tool. I only have 3 more slides, bear with me. So the growth tool, this is separate from Marzano. It's a completely separate thing. We do this kind of by hand, if you will, and that we calculate the scores by hand and then import them, or I actually email them to the Marzano team and they upload it into your evaluation. So something that's different for this year, and the templates are attached so you can open one up and start playing with it. The calculation is the same. So you put in the pre-assessment score and a target will populate for you. So you type in this, you type in the names, you type in the pre-assessment score, and it will give you a target. That is not any different. It's still a simple average formula. What is different is when you type in this post-assessment score, instead of it being a threshold you have to reach, like 85% of students have made their threshold in order to be a 4. Instead, it assigns each student a separate score. So for, in this case, Alexander Hamilton and Biggie Smalls both met their target. So 95 and 99, 87. Notice it turned green. That gives them then a 4. So there's, in this formula, a placeholder for a 4. Other students have an orangish color. That would be because they were assigned a 3, and that means that they were within 85% of the growth needed. You can see that over here. So they reached 85% of the growth needed, and that made them a 3. And then we had one student, little Stevie Nutzel. He did not quite make it, not even within 85% of making it, and so he would be assigned a 2. And what happens then is all of these 4, 3s, and 2s are averaged. And what that does is gives you a number that looks like this. So last year it was a 4, a 3, or a 2, and it still is that. You can't go below a 2. But in the 4 and 3 and 2, it wasn't an average. It's either you made this percent or you didn't. Whereas now it is, which should allow for some flexibility for students who were close. So for students who are close, they receive a 3, and that allows, I think, for a more accurate representation of student growth for those students. Every student rostered to you should be recorded in this template. For students who are absent or you have concerns about that you want to exempt them from the data, you would need to work with your building principal. They have to approve all exemptions. Finally, the calendar. Thanks for bearing with me. Only one more slide after this. Each observation cycle is really meant to be collaborative. You really should be working with your evaluator to go through what it's being observed, what the elements mean, and the scores should be about a conversation. The other piece of this that's important is that in the post-conference, teachers can bring evidence to impact your scores. So you can, in this collaborative conversation, meet with your evaluator and talk through your scores. Really, right now in September, your principal should be meeting with anybody who needs to do a professional growth plan. Teachers should be signing up or thinking about the formal evaluation process, and the evaluations, principals can do formal or informal first. There's no specific requirement on that. We're looking in January to have that mid-year check with anyone doing the professional growth plan, and most observations should be completed by May. Really, that scores due by May 31st. Really, many of the scores should be done by May 31st with face-to-face meetings regarding the scores starting then. You can look through this. There are some requirements by law as far as the school board, the face-to-face sit-downs, the meeting with the teachers doing the growth plan, but we do have specific dates because we have a report due to the state, so the due dates are pretty firm for those things. So I know that was 20 probably felt like 25 really long minutes to you. It did to me as well, and I'm sorry I don't know how to go through it in a way that's any more efficient. You probably have a lot of questions. Your principals have all attended training on this. There's my phone number right there on the screen. You can email me anytime. I'll be around in buildings as we work through this. Feel free to ask the questions that will help you understand what the tool looks like. I hope you had a great start to your school year. And again, please just let me know if you have any concerns or questions or need clarification. Thank you.